Of all the questions we ask ourselves in the quiet hours, when no one's watching and no masks are left to wear, why am I even alive? Might be the most confronting, and yet it might also be the most honest. We live in a world that rewards polished answers and punishes existential vulnerability. We are trained to say, I'm fine, even when we are not. We celebrate certainty and avoid ambiguity, especially when it comes to the self. But the truth is, asking this question is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of depth. It means you're awake, perhaps painfully so, but awake nonetheless. This question is not just emotional, it's existential, philosophical, even spiritual. It touches the core of who we are. And yet many of us are taught, either by society or by the voice in our own heads, that this question is too dark to voice aloud, that to ask it means something is wrong with you. But let me tell you plainly, there is nothing wrong with asking this question. In fact, there is something profoundly human in daring to sit with it. We live in a time where external validation is often mistaken for internal clarity. Like titles or roles, we use them to cover the silence underneath. But when all that falls away, and it will at some point, you're left with the rawness of being. That uncomfortable stillness where the ego cannot hide. And it's in that space that the question arises, why am I even alive? You see, the question is not the problem. The silence we surround it with is. Let's explore what's really happening when someone asks this. At its heart, it's not a cry for pity or melodrama, it's a search for grounding, a need to find a thread of meaning when everything feels unraveled. And here's the paradox. The very fact that we can ask this question proves that we are capable of self-awareness and reflection. No other creature on this planet asks why it exists. Trees grow, rivers flow. But we, humans, pause. We contemplate, we wrestle with the weight of existence. That's not a defect, that's a gift. A terrifying, beautiful gift. Psychologically, this question often arises not from weakness, but from exhaustion, mental fatigue, emotional depletion. The brain, under sustained stress, begins to question the point of continued effort. This is not failure, this is biology and lived experience colliding. And yet, we shame ourselves for it. We say, I should be stronger, I should be grateful, I should be better. But should is a cruel word when you are suffering. It invalidates the reality of pain and replaces it with performance. Let me offer a different perspective, asking, why am I even alive? Is not a dead end. It's a doorway. It's an invitation to re-examine not just your circumstances, but your values, your beliefs of, and the story you've been told about what your life is supposed to mean. Sometimes we ask this question because we've been living a life designed by other people. Expectations, traditions, systems, scripts. And one day we realize we're exhausted not because life is meaningless, but because the life we're living doesn't align with who we are becoming. That moment of realization can feel like a breakdown, but it's often a breakthrough in disguise. Philosophers from Camus to Kierkegaard have explored this terrain. Camus famously said that the fundamental philosophical question is whether life is worth living. He didn't mean that as a cry of despair. He meant that as a call to confront the absurdity of life with courage. He argued that even in a universe that offers no inherent meaning, we can choose to live with defiance, dignity, and even joy. Kierkegaard, on the other hand, spoke of a leap of faith. The idea that even when rational answers fail, there is still value in choosing to exist with intention. Both perspectives point to the same truth. We may not find a universal answer, but we can construct a personal one. So, if you find yourself asking this question, don't rush to silence it. Don't wrap it in toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing. Sit with it. Let it speak. Let it strip away the noise, the distractions, the false identities. Because underneath the discomfort of that question lies a radical possibility. The chance to live a life that is truly yours. Not inherited, not expected, not borrowed. Yours. And that's where transformation begins. Not in having all the answers, but in daring to ask the real questions. The question, why am I even alive, is not a weakness to be fixed. It is a mirror to be faced. And sometimes, it's only when we truly look into that mirror, with all the fear and uncertainty it holds, that we begin to see ourselves, not as failures, but as works in progress, worthy of grace and capable of change. You don't need to have an answer today. But if you're still here, still breathing, still questioning, then that in itself is a beginning. If asking, why am I even alive, opens the door of what often holds us back from walking through it, is the pressure to have a perfectly packaged answer. We've been conditioned to believe that life must come with a clear purpose, an obvious direction, a reason so convincing that it silences all doubt of, but real life, doesn't always work like that. And the expectation that it should is quietly crushing so many of us from the inside out. We live in an age obsessed with clarity, career paths, 5-year plans, vision boards. We're told that if we don't know exactly where we're going, we must be lost. But the truth is, some of the most meaningful lives began in uncertainty. Some of the most impactful people on this planet didn't have a plan. They had questions. They had pain. They had curiosity. And they allowed those things to lead them, not define them. We must begin to understand that purpose is not something we find once and for all, like a prize waiting at the end of a treasure hunt. It's something we build, piece by piece, through lived experience, through paying attention, and often through suffering. There's a kind of quiet, of deliberate wisdom in realizing that you don't have to know your purpose to have value. You don't have to be certain to be worthy. You don't have to have it all figured out to take the next step. Philosophically speaking, we've inherited this idea from the Enlightenment era, that reason and logic will eventually lead us to truth, that everything must be knowable, nameable, and explained. But life, as you've probably discovered, is rarely that tidy. Sometimes there are more questions than answers. Sometimes the very act of living feels like wandering through a fog, and yet even in that fog we continue to breathe, to move, to connect. That in itself is meaningful. Psychologically, the need for answers is rooted in our desire for control. The brain is designed to seek patterns, to make sense of things, to avoid ambiguity. So, when we're in pain or when life feels directionless, the brain starts to panic. It tells us that unless we know our purpose, we're failing. But that's not true. That's just fear dressed up in the language of logic. Real life is often nonlinear. Healing is nonlinear. Growth is nonlinear. And purpose is no exception. I've spoken to people who thought they had found their calling. People with successful careers, loving families, lives that seemed perfect from the outside. And still, they came to me with a deep sense of emptiness. Not because they were broken, but because they had confused achievement with purpose. That's a common trap. We think if we collect enough accomplishments, the emptiness will go away. But the truth is, meaning doesn't come from what we do nearly as much as how and why we do it. So if you're in a space where you feel like your life lacks direction, I want to say this very clearly, that does not mean your life lacks value. Sometimes your only job is to keep moving, to stay open, to try things, to fail at things, to start again. And through that process, life begins to reveal itself, not as a linear path, but as a mosaic. Some pieces dark, others bright. Some jagged, others smooth. But together, they form something that is uniquely yours. It's also worth saying this, sometimes the search for purpose becomes so overwhelming that we forget to live at all. We become paralyzed waiting for some divine sign or perfect moment. But life is not found in waiting rooms. It's found in the messy, unscripted moments. In the laughter that catches you off guard. In the friend who listens when you break down. In the decision to get out of bed on a day when your whole body says no. And here's a radical idea, maybe you don't need a grand, world-shaking purpose. Maybe being present, being kind, being real, that's enough. Maybe purpose is not a destination, but a way of being. A way of choosing to show up again and again, even when you're unsure. One of the most powerful things I've learned from both philosophy and psychology is this: you are allowed to live a meaningful life, even in the absence of certainty. You are allowed to be a work in progress. You are allowed to say, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm still going to love, still going to create, still going to try. That choice in itself is a kind of purpose. So if you're still searching for your why, don't let the absence of a perfect answer convince you that your life has no meaning. The path doesn't become visible before you walk it. You make it visible by walking. You do not need to have all the answers. You just need the courage to live the questions, fully, honestly, and without shame. And often, that's where the most beautiful answers begin. So often, when we reach a point of asking, why am I even alive? It's not because we've lost our ability to exist. It's because we've lost sight of our impact. We feel invisible, unnecessary, as if our presence in the world makes no real difference to anyone or anything. That feeling is heavy. It creates a deep inner silence, as if the world is moving on without noticing us. But here's what's so important to understand. Just because you can't see your impact doesn't mean it isn't there. We live in a culture that defines significance through visibility, through numbers, influence, of recognition. If people aren't applauding you, if your name isn't being echoed, it's easy to think your life is insignificant. But the most profound impacts are often the ones we'll never fully see. They live in small moments, in glances, in memories that other people carry, memories of you. There is psychological weight in being unseen. Human beings are wired for connection. From birth, we crave being mirrored, acknowledged, affirmed. So when we feel like our lives go unnoticed, that need doesn't disappear, it just turns inward. It becomes shame, or isolation, or despair. We begin to believe the lie that we are replaceable, forgettable, or worse, irrelevant. But let's interrogate that belief for a moment. Have you ever had a conversation with someone that changed the course of your day, or even your life? Maybe they didn't even know how much it meant. Maybe they were just being themselves, a smile, a sentence, a moment of patience. But it stayed with you. It softened something hard in you. It reminded you you weren't alone. Now ask yourself, how many times might you have been that person for someone else without even realizing it? You see, impact isn't always a loud thing. It's often quiet, subtle. It's in the friend who remembers how you like your coffee, in the stranger who feels seen because of the way you looked them in the eye, in the child who learned kindness because you practiced it consistently, even when no one else was watching. These are not small things. These are the threads that hold the human experience together. Philosophically, we are relational beings. Martin Buber, a 20th century philosopher, spoke of the I-Tao relationship, the idea that we only become fully human through genuine connection with others. We do not exist in isolation, even when we feel lonely. Our lives are inextricably linked to the lives of others, often in ways we can't perceive. So when you're questioning your worth, ask not just, what have I achieved? But, who have I affected? And remember, those answers might not show up on a resume or social media feed. They might live in someone else's silence, in someone else's healing. There's also a concept in psychology called the looking glass self, proposed by sociologist Charles Cooley. It suggests that we shape our sense of self based on how we think others see us. The danger in this is that when we feel ignored or undervalued, we begin to internalize that perception and see ourselves through a distorted mirror. But just because someone doesn't acknowledge your value doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Their silence is not a measurement of your significance. In moments of crisis, people often say, they won't even notice if I'm gone. But that's not true. People notice absence in the same way we notice air only when it's missing. Your absence would echo in the spaces you quietly filled, in routines, in relationships, in all the unnoticed ways you hold things together. Think of the people in your life you've never thanked properly. Not because they didn't matter, but because they were consistent, present, reliable. Now imagine someone else feels that way about you, but never found the words. You don't have to change the world to matter. You don't have to be famous to be missed. Sometimes your very existence is the steady ground someone else is standing on, and you may never know it. But that doesn't make it any less real. The truth is we are all shaping each other, quietly, constantly. Like drops of water on stone, our presence wears into the lives of those around us, not always visibly, but inevitably. So when that voice in your head whispers that you don't matter, that your life is small, that your being is without effect, remember this: you are a living influence. Whether or not you see it, whether or not they say it, you are not invisible. You are woven into the lives of others in ways you may never fully understand. And sometimes remembering that, choosing to believe that, is enough to take the next breath, because someone out there is already breathing easier because of you.